You know her from last week, and so she needs no introduction. Here's part two with Dr. Zoe Wimshurst. I hope you enjoy. This is really interesting. Um, I've got a million questions going on in my head, so I'm trying to figure out. So when we're talking about the training of younger athletes,
hmm
now I don't want you to divulge all your information because I appreciate that people will come to you and hire services, so please don't put yourself out of work. But in terms of some basic things that people could do to help their players try and not be so focused because I think the screen thing is fascinating. Most people,
Mm,
if you look at them walking down the street, they've got their head down slightly, looking at their phone,
yeah.
um, video games, all of that type of stuff. Naturally, that's probably going to become more and more part of everyday life. In terms of little techniques or little things or little tasks you can get people to do that would generically just help them in, I guess, holistically, is there
Yeah.
anything you could do in that space?
Yeah, so the most important thing I would say every 20 minutes, you take a 5 minute break and you go and you look outside into the distance, hopefully in natural light conditions. But if you are stuck inside, at least spend time kind of looking to the other side of the room. So a 5 minute break from doing your schoolwork shouldn't be spent playing on your phone to distract you, but it should be spent like how far into the distance can you see? What can you actually focus on that's as far away as you can possibly focus? And then back close again and then far away again. So every 20 minutes, have a 5 minute break to make sure that your eyes are still moving around, but particularly to different distances that they're moving at. There's also blue light glasses. So if you're sitting in front of a computer a lot of the time, if you have these glasses that can help to filter out some of the blue light, that can be good for helping things like fatigue in the eyes as well. So there's more and more technology things that are coming into it. But really, the best thing I can advise is every 20 minutes, have a 5 minute break from looking at things close to you.
Perfect. And then one thing you hear, particularly in American sports, I guess, they talk about quarterbacks in American football saying the game slows down for them. And they talk about, I guess, the cognitive process that all of a sudden, after 3 or 4 years, just everything seems to get slower. Is that phenomenon said that right as well. Is that phenomenon because they're able to pick up on those cues a little bit quicker, a little bit better, and that maybe because they're more experienced than some of the other players around them, their their cues that they're able to pick up is quicker than the other players, which then allows them to feel like they've got more time rather than it actually being anything physical.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. So it's going to be to do with that experience, getting themselves in the right place, knowing where to look, those scan patterns, because they're embedded within the team. Once you've been playing for a couple of years, you're going to be less stressed in the environment that you're performing in as well. So the effects of stress on the visual system are huge. So if you're less stressed or you're able to manage that stress, certain things will open up to you that haven't before. But yeah, you hear this a lot of the time is that things slow down or the ball just looks bigger to you in sports like cricket and baseball. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that comes with experience, can be enhanced, I think, through training the visual system to speed that process up, but it's still not going to happen overnight. There are some bits of technology which do help in the short term. So you can get things called strobe specs. So they're a pair, they look like fancy sunglasses, but they have a strobe light in them. And sometimes I get goalkeepers maybe to wear them during a warm up. So it's really difficult because like it's completely blacked out some of the time, so you can't see. But once you take them off, then everything does seem for a period of time like it's moving much slower to you because you're suddenly able to get more information in than you were able to in the warm up. So some technology things are helping with that as well.
Perfect. That sounds really cool. I look forward to seeing all the Premier League goalkeepers wearing like
Yeah.
Edgar David sunglasses and stuff. In terms of stress, you mentioned the effect that stress can have on the vision. What are some of the effects it has, and how pronounced is it when people are playing?
So, one of the most major things that we see as the effect of stress is that it reduces your peripheral vision. So, I've managed to measure this myself in various athletes I've worked with. You'll test them and see where their vision is normally when they're not under stress. And most people can see to around 170, maybe 180 degrees. So that's pretty much level with themselves. They can see to either side. You put a little bit of stress on them. And so all this involves is me standing behind them, being as evil as I can, saying, oh, you missed one. It's not good performance. You're not doing as well as last time. And all of a sudden, their peripheral vision will reduce by 20, 30, maybe 40 degrees, which is a huge amount. So stress definitely affects the periphery, and that's something that coaches should take into account. So when a young player is stepping up to the next team for the first time, they are undoubtedly going to feel stressed, and usually their performance will dip. And quite often coaches will just say, oh, they weren't ready for the step up, instead of thinking what that step up will have done to all of their different things. So psychologically, things like confidence will come into it as well. But physiologically, that reduction in periphery is going to make a big difference to what they're able to see and therefore what they're able to do. So we need to think of strategies in the long term for helping them manage and reduce the stress. But in the short term, having strategies that they can use to understand that your periphery has shrunk. So you're going to have to do more head turns to scan to see those passes square to you. So preparing players for what is likely to happen to them can help them make that step up more easily, or even kind of in those tough situations where you're in a cup final and there's a few minutes to go, what strategies can you use to understand that stress is going to do this to your body? So what can we do to make its effect as low as possible on performance?
That was going to be my next question, actually. So, if you look at people that have sustained success at the top levels, like your Man Cities at the moment, or Cristiano Ronaldo, or whoever, is part of their ability the fact that because they've been there before, they've been through it, it's not their first time, that actually um, visually they don't get those shrinks where they might stay at 180 degrees or whatever it may be, and actually they're just able to take on more information more of the time because they're not as aroused by the situation as the other team that maybe this is their first cup final or first experience.
I definitely think that has a part to play in it. Yes. I think another thing, quite often when you see those teams who do have sustained success, they all look like they're enjoying playing. And when you're enjoying yourself and having fun, you're not as stressed. So by introducing that level of relaxed, fun type of play, you're going to start to counter some of those effects that the stress will have. And so it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that the less stressed you are, the more fun you'll have and the better performance you'll have, and therefore because you're performing well, you don't need to get stressed as much. So absolutely, I think that has a huge part to play in it. And I think as well the opposite is true too. So a team who's doing really well in a season all of a sudden starts to feel that pressure on themselves, and then they're going to go into games and start to feel a bit of stress because everyone's looking at them at the top of the league and they're not doing quite so well. Their peripheral and other factors will shrink and reduce, and then they're not able to play as well anymore physiologically. And then the results don't go their way, and the stress mounts, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. So, yeah, it absolutely works both ways.
As a Tottenham fan, I'm very happy with that this year because that's exactly what happened to Arsenal. So that was
Yeah.
a good thing this year. But it's interesting you say because the stress side of being in relegation battles or being under pressure for results, you think about it as purely a confidence thing. But actually, if there's physiological changes that are taking place,
Yeah.
probably as much to do about that as it is external factors or confidence or
Yeah,
whatnot as well.
definitely. And I think it's difficult. Confidence is a difficult thing to work on as a concept. Like, how do you make someone more confident? Whereas if you can say to them, look, here's some physiological things that are going to go wrong, let's work on those. The player's confidence is very likely to automatically increase because they feel like you're working on the things that are going to make a difference to them. So it goes the psychology and the physiology side of this goes hand in hand. If you work on one, it's going to improve the other. And I personally think that it's sometimes easier to work on those physiological things because players can kind of hook into that easier. You can show them with some simple tests like, okay, before when you were stressed, your periphery shrunk to this much, but you were just able to use techniques. And actually, it maintained almost where it was when there was no stress at all. So, you can take that into a game, and that's naturally going to build their confidence up and help them develop those techniques for being able to perform better.
athletes being control freaks, right? They want to be able to fix the problem. And actually, that's quite a nice
Absolutely.
way of skillfully saying, oh, no, we've got an ability to potentially fix this problem. So you just need to engage with it. And that, they'll go, oh, I'll jump into that then if that's going to help.
Yeah, and obviously, because I do come from a psychology background, even though that's not what I do on a day-to-day basis, I do find that a lot of what I do does end up tapping into the psychology of what players are doing, but they don't think of me as a psychologist. So actually, sometimes they almost listen more because it's not got that stigma that as a psychologist has, oh, there's got to be something wrong with me to go and see the psychologist. No, this is about making you get the best out of yourself. And if I can come into it from a different angle, but still use my psychological skills in there, then it should be able to get the most out of the players.
And then I probably first heard about this type of work, I believe Clive Woodward with the England setup.
Hmm.
Um, if that is the case, what did they do during that period? What was the purpose of it? Who got involved? Yeah, if you could just explain to everyone, because that's the first time I ever came across it when I was relatively young. I was like, okay, that seems really cool. But could you, yeah, just describe to us what that actually was and what they did and what they were trying to achieve at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for a lot of people, through Clive Woodward is the first and possibly the only time they've ever heard about vision training work. So, for the 2003 Rugby World Cup, which England went on to win, Clive Woodward brought in a woman called Cheryl Calder, who's a South African lady, and she's kind of the pioneer of this research in improving people's vision. So, she worked with the England team in 2003, and I think she worked with the Springboks team who'd won the World Cup the time before in 1999. So she's one of the most successful people at winning Rugby World Cups. So Clive brought her in to work with them, and they were doing all sorts of different things. So um, some of it was related to those training those basic underlying visual capabilities. So they had a computer program that they used, which I personally think it's better than doing nothing, but a computer program isn't necessarily the best way to train. But if you're not going to be doing anything else, why not? So they had some computer programs they used to train things like ability to move your eyes quickly. Um, they did stuff um, kind of what you might look at and think of it as a handling drill, but actually it's improving your vision as well. And they also worked on things like tactically within a team, which is another huge part of vision training. If you think about rugby in particular, the person who is making a lot of the decisions is the scrum half. But when they're having to make the decision, their head is down, rummaging to try and get the ball out of the bottom of a scrum or a ruck or a big heap of people. So their vision is going to be really poor because they've got their head down and there's a big pile of people in front of them. So I know something that the England team with Clive worked on is okay, so if they're not going to have good vision, who does have the best vision? And that's going to be the people next to them spread all the way across the pitch. So what they did is they developed certain scanning techniques that everyone on the whole pitch would use the same scanning patterns. They'd scan from the crossbar to orient themselves on the pitch, and then they'd scan to the two touch lines, and then they communicate with the people next to them. And so if I'm the scrum half at the bottom of the kind of ruck trying to get the ball out, I've got people in my ear telling me where the space is. And because I know that they've used the same scanning technique that I've been told to use, they're going to have the same information. So I'm going to trust more what they're going to say. And it puts that scanning down to everyone on the pitch instead of it just being the person who's about to receive the ball. It's suddenly everyone's responsibility. And this is something that I think is really fantastic and is something that should be introduced a lot more is how can tactically you make the most of where people are looking and what they're looking for. So, for example, if you know that a player on the opposition team is a really, really strong player and they tend to hold a certain position, if you can get them to go out of that position, then you've got the space to exploit it. But you need people to be scanning for when is that person out of position? Okay, let's communicate now. We can go there. Or someone on the opposition team has just taken a bit of a knock, so they're not going to be maybe as alert as they once were. Okay, so for the next 5 minutes, we're going to target that person and put them under pressure. But it comes down to having everyone on the team following the same tactics and using their scanning to identify what they can go on and do.
And obviously, from that perspective, it seems really process driven in terms of going. Actually, we're going to highlight specific areas of the pitch we want you to look at, and then you'll gain the information you need from there. Would you say that that's the most effective way of doing it in terms of if you're trying to do it as a collective, having that process of going, we are all going to do this. Is that the best way to get alignment?
Usually, yes, I would say so because you want everyone on the team to have the confidence and the faith in each other, and it comes down to the tactics. So again, if so for example, the hockey team that I play in now, our first tactic is if we win the ball in one area of the pitch, if you divide the pitch horizontal, no, vertically into say three different areas, if you win the ball in the right hand area, you immediately want to transfer it over at least one area, so that you're out of the area of congestion. So what our team should all be doing is all scanning to see where there is someone in the next zone over that we're able to then move the ball on quickly to. And if we're all following that same pattern, then our tactics should come together to work. So it's about working with the coaching staff to work out, well, what are your tactics? So how can where you're scanning to help your players best implement those tactics? Because if you're only scanning forwards or you're only scanning when the ball is on its way to you, you're going to miss a huge amount of information of what's happening around the pitch so that you can then make sure that your first touch opens your body up to take it to where you need to pass to next.
And how quickly would you look to do that? So would you do it on pretty much every pass? So every time there's a change of the stimulus in terms of the ball, would you then say to him, right, like you need to reframe at this point, so now you need to look at who's in the next zone? Or yeah, how often would you look to do that?
So I think it depends, and this is something that I've been working on, interestingly enough, with my dad, who's a really, really good hockey coach, and he's kind of really into the work that I do and scanning. So we've been working on when is the best time to scan, and actually there are certain times when you're going to have more time to scan the whole pitch and take in the big picture, and there are going to be times when you just have time for a confirmatory check. So when the ball goes out of play, you watch most sporting teams and environments, and everyone is just looking at the ball as it's gone out of play. How is that helping? The ball is out of play. There's no pressure on you. Scan and see where everyone is. Take in the big picture of what is happening on the pitch at that time. Adjust your position so that you can be in the best place, not necessarily to receive the ball, but to help with your tactics. So when the ball is out of play, you have loads of time, and yet most people don't scan them. Most of the talk about scanning is only about what happens in the 10 seconds up to you receiving the ball. And really, in that time, you only have the time to do maybe a confirmatory scan. So before that, when the ball isn't on its way to you, you need to then be using that time to go, okay, so the ball's there, I'm here, here are my options, this is where I'd like it to go. So that's where I'm going to first check for my confirmatory scan when the ball is on its way to me. But if that's closed off, I know that there are other options over here. So it's about utilizing the time and the space that you have at different opportunities and not just thinking about scanning as being what happens as you're about to receive the ball. That's one part of it, but one small part of it.
And then what would the Holy Grail look like for you in this space? So obviously you're in a position now where obviously there is some research that's been put in place, there's some practical implementation of it. I'd imagine that you're going to get, clubs trying to investigate it for marginal gains, etc. If I were to say to you, magic wand, all the funding you could ever want, 5 years' time, what would you say the perfect implementation of this type of work would be? And where do you think it's going to end up?
Okay, so from my perspective, I think in the long term, the big picture has to be probably me working or someone in my situation working with coaches more than they're working with players to get coaches to implement into all the things that they're doing, how and when you should be scanning, how you can be using these different things to actually make a difference in on the pitch. Before that, so potentially you might want before that to screen all the players to see what their visual capabilities are so that if there are areas of weakness, you can train them separately and then look at how it's implemented on the pitch. But that should happen just maybe once a season. If a player has weaknesses, I'd work with them probably on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis to improve those skills. So then when they're on the pitch, they can learn to use them. There's loads of stuff that can be done as well. So when a player is injured, what are they doing for their recovery? Obviously, they're spending a lot of time just with the physios, but could they be incorporating vision into what they're doing in their recovery for multiple reasons? Firstly, because hopefully then when they recover from their injury, they're going to go back into performing as a better player than before they got injured because they've had time to spend working on some of those visual skills. But also, there is some evidence to show that if you've had, I can't remember which injury it was the research was done on, some kind of a knee injury, you're more likely to re-injure yourself when you first go back out to play. And that's because a lot of the rehab that you're doing, you're having to use your visual system to help you balance and control your body. And then as soon as you're back out into a live match situation, you can't use your vision just to help you stabilize that once injured joint because you're having to use your vision to play the game. So what we want to do as well is introduce into rehab work, having to get people to use their visual system for things other than just stabilizing where the injury was to hopefully then prevent re-injury. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but as I say, I think this is something that should and could be implemented throughout a club, from those individual skills, working with injured players. But the gold standard would be getting the coaches and working with them to integrate it into a huge amount of what they're doing, both in terms of the skill development, but the tactics of the team as well.
No, that makes complete sense. The knee injury ones are really interesting as well. You look a lot at female football at the moment, it seems to be recurrence of
Huge.
ACLs,
Yeah.
MCLs, all of that type of stuff. And I know I've seen a few people on Twitter discussing maybe some of the reasons for why on that, but that might be another one as well in terms of, yeah, like you've mentioned there, if it is a reoccurrence of the same injury, that actually if there's already an issue there for whatever reason in terms of the way the women are being trained, when you
Mm.
then add in the fact that they're not focusing on the stimulus during rehab sessions, you're almost doubling up the factors of things that could make it challenging for them to return to play properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then in terms of the use of VR, because it's something that you see more and more, and I guess people are discussing like the ability to take uh, loading times off and players being able to work in that space. Do you see that as something that could potentially be utilized? Is it the same, or is it because it's virtual reality? It's slightly different in terms of the way that we process the information, etc.
So virtual reality is something that I don't have a huge amount of experience of using myself. And I think it has its place, but I don't think it's going to be the be all and end all that some people seem to think it is. I think it can absolutely be used for, like you say, taking the load off some players, giving them thinking opportunities, helping with decision-making processes. But in terms of what your visual system is doing, it's not providing the same kind of a stimulus as you'd have out on the pitch. So you don't have depth perception involved with virtual reality, even if, you know, the area is kind of making people look smaller. It's not, your eyes are not having to do the same thing as they were before. You have to do big head turns in order to see what is happening around you. Whereas in a game situation, it's going to be much quicker if you just do a flick of the eyes instead of a big head turn. But VR can't take that into account, as far as I'm aware. So again, you're trying to alter things in players, which isn't necessarily the best thing for their performance. If you could just get them to do an eye flick, that's surely better than a head turn, but VR doesn't account for that. So I do think it is got a lot of potential, and I'm really interested to see all the research that's coming out of it. I know that at your club they're doing a big project using VR at the moment, so it's really, really interesting to see where that's going. I just think at the moment it's not something that is as good as it could be potentially.
And then in terms of if people are interested in this field, obviously you've mentioned a little bit around the goggles space. If there are any teams listening that wanted to go down that route, I guess what's the feasibility of that being run out in clubs? Are they expensive? Is it hard to get hold of? Can people use it in game and be able to get like real life circumstances when they're actually playing matches, or what does that look like at the moment?
So there's lots of different things. So the eye tracker, which is going to show you where people are looking, it's not something you can use in game because it would break if you headed the ball. It's like wearing a pair of glasses with a battery pack attached, but you can be very clever in training scenarios so that you get a good impression of it. However, they are very expensive. We're talking thousands of pounds for them. Plus, you'd need someone who knows how to work and analyze them properly. However, lots of universities have them. So if you're a club based close to a university, reach out to them and see if they are interested in doing any research with you, because I know lots and lots of universities are looking for ways to do more research with sports teams. So that might be one way. or get in contact with me. If I can't help you myself, I can usually put you in contact with people who can do things like the strobe specs I talked about in terms of slowing things down. They You have to buy them from the States, I think, at the moment. A company called Synaptic are the ones that I usually get mine from. They're a few £100s for a pair. So it's potentially something that people might want to invest in as a club. But again, you need to know how to use them in the right way to get the most out of them. So I would always say maybe work with someone like myself to start off with, and then, can leave you with things to help you to keep implementing and keep improving your players' ability while they're there, instead of just buying things that are gimmicky and not being able to use them right, and then you'll never get the benefit out of them.
You've segued nicely into my next question, which is going to be if people did want to get in contact, with interest in this, or they want to ask questions that I haven't done with my mind racing during this conversation, how can they get in contact with you regarding that?
So my website is performancevision, all as one word, .co.uk, and there's contact forms on there, or you can email me, which is zoe@performancevision.co.uk. And I'm always really interested to hear from anyone with questions or who wants to just know more information or potentially do some work in this field. So please do reach out and I will get back to you and help in any way I can.
Perfect. And the last question for me, which is if I were to ask any of the coaches or players that you work with to describe you in 3 words, how do you hope they describe you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I hope they would describe me as um knowledgeable. I think that's quite important. Hopefully they would describe me as fun. I like to make sure that everything I'm doing is quite fun. And how else? Yeah, maybe just easy to get along with. I hope I get on quite well in all situations. I've worked in loads of different teams and with individuals, and I think I get on quite well with everyone and try and kind of integrate myself into what they're doing. So yeah, hopefully those three.
Perfect. Listen, I will let you crack on with the rest of your day. I'm definitely going to be emailing you some other questions that I'm going to think about after this call,
Brilliant.
but really appreciate your time and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been a really fun chat.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.